And you know, you wrote a wonderful piece once called Our Beginnings Never Know Our Ends. And of course, obviously it applies to you, I would think, because you've spent, what, 60 odd years now in Sri Lanka. But before that, you were born in Germany. And then you left Germany to go to England. And I suppose you would never have thought when you were 10 years old that you would live here. But let me just ask you, because we're focusing much on Sri Lanka, what was it like to come here in the late 40s, early 50s, married to a very distinguished Sri Lankan professor, but who already had children by a previous marriage, and then settled down?
Well, it was quite an ordeal, but I think what happened was that I was very young. I had lived through several crises in Germany, first of all with Hitler, and I managed to get out, and then going to England, and the war broke out, and my school was in a dangerous zone because England, Germany might attack from the sea. So all foreigners were thrown out, and they wanted to send me out of the school, but somehow I managed to stay behind, so that was the second crisis. So when, after I met my husband, and my aunt threw up her hand, my aunt was my guardian because my parents were not there at all, and she was absolutely horrified. And she said, well, you can't marry this man because he probably has a harem, and he put you into a harem. Being a German girl, my nationality was German. I was not able to get a scholarship because it was because of the war. And so I thought the best thing is I do first of all my midwifery. So I went to King's College, and my husband happened to be there doing his postgraduate, whatever. And somehow we met and whatever, and I was studying very hard for my midwifery exam. They used to take me out. And then finally he asked me to marry him. So we had a very quiet wedding. We had no money, none whatsoever. So then further problems.
He was born in England, was he? Oh, right.
Well, he was born in England because at that time there were no aeroplanes that you hopped into. It was just after the war. But what happened was that you could only travel by boat after the baby was 6 months old.
Right.
Now Dad had to get back. He had passed his exams, we had our honeymoon, and he had to go back here. So then he came back, and I was there. I was pregnant at the time. And then Anne and I had a very dramatic birth. I went into a little flat by myself while I was pregnant. The hospital wouldn't release me.
Right.
I said, I'm getting too fat now, you have to let me, nothing doing, you're just putting on a little weight. You have to work as long as you can. So I was working until right near the end, and the landlady's daughter was a very nice young girl. So she and I went to a film, to see Somerset Maugham's. He has written a story about a circus where somebody dies from a high board into a barrel, right? So at the moment, that very tense moment, at that moment, the membranes ruptured in cinema.
Right.
So anyway, they carted me off to hospital. I went to the very nice hospital, and Ananda was born.
And then you had
so
to
then
come back.
I had to wait for 4 years, for 4 months.
Right.
All the women used to say to me, how is it that your baby is such a beautiful tan? You know, and I used to push out Anand in his white sheets and with his nice skin and whatever. And I said, oh, it's very simple. I feed him carrots. So they fed him carrots. So anyhow, then the two of us had to come back by ourselves here by boat. And that was a nightmare of a journey. Because he howled all the way from Southampton to Colombo.
Did you have a cabin to yourself, or
What?
did you have a cabin to yourself, or probably
We
not?
had a cabin to ourselves, but that didn't help. Because every time I wanted to go to a meal, he wanted to, I mean, he had to be taken along. Every time a steward would come with his baby and say, Madam, you know. So anyhow, we arrived here. Da hadn't seen the baby.
Right.
And he was a very nice baby.
Yeah.
At that time when I arrived, you arrived at the old harbor.
Right.
And outside. And so Di had to come on a little boat and take us off the boat. That was a wonderful reunion.
What is intriguing is that having come here with Ananda and then had 3 children more, and you know, your daughter Shanti grew up with my sister and the families were quite close. But then I found, as it were, when I came back from university, your children had all gone away and you have been alone here. Of course they come and visit, but they've settled abroad in their various ways.
Places.
And you are now the sole inhabitant of this house, except for your fantastic staff. So how do you manage in terms of seeing this now as your base?
Well, I have until I fell ill, we are not going to talk about this illness, but I've had a very busy life. I started when I was about, when Renuka, my youngest daughter, was about, I would say, 7 years old, she started swimming abroad and all that sort of thing. I started thinking, now what am I going to do? Because my husband was older than I myself, so he died earlier. And I had always wanted to write. I'd already written, as a 10-year-old, I wrote a play, you know that.
Yes.
A German play in verse, no less.
That's something we had in common, because I think you were one of the first I showed my play to, when I was 16 or 17.
That is right, absolutely. Yes, that is yes, I think I have seen your work when you were right at the beginnings of things. No? That's right. Anyway, so then what happened was that I decided, I was writing a little bit. When I was 14, I had a poem published in England, in A Woman's Own.
And in English?
In English. Right. I just learned English.
Yes, exactly.
But anyway, they paid me, so that was very important. So anyway, after that, then I started nursing, and then I got married, and then this family and all this upheaval. But I was writing, you know, now this family was a little bit problematical. I've written a story called The Stepmother, which is me, of course. About
Da's early children from his first marriage.
That story has become very famous. BBC has taken that. Yes. It's but the person who is really the hero or the villain of the piece denies ever having read the story. Anyway, but then I thought, well, I think I must solidify this a bit, and I decided that I would like to have some kind of training. And so I announced to the joint family that I was going to the Polytechnic in Velavatte. And so they threw up their hands in horror, and my husband said, nothing doing, you can't go there. And the children said, you will never pass, you'll never pass the examinations, you will fail and you'll be disgraced to the family, and so on, you can't put your name. So I ignored the lot and I went. And I had a lovely time.
That's a writing class.
What?
A writing class, was it? Or?
At the Polytechnic, I had to go 3 times a week. Lectures and classes and exam at the end.
On writing or on?
Yes, on journalism, short story writing, poetry writing, and the law.
Right.
So then at the end, we had a very good teacher.
Who was it?
I can't remember his name. And then I asked him at the end, he must be dead and gone by now. I said to him, do you think it's worthwhile my continuing with it? He said, oh yes, you continue, but you have to find out whether people will take your work. So then it so happened that Renuka went for a swimming meet, as you know, in Singapore, and I wrote that poem. Yes, and Mervyn de Silva took it for the editorial page. And that was my first sort of real success, and I never looked back now.
No, because I know when I came back, as it were, and the British Council decided that we really had to do something for Sri Lankan writing in English.
Yes.
You know, my 2 mainstays
that was
were
when we put up the English Writers' Cooperative.
Before that, in the early 80s, we tried to celebrate, and you and Jean Ranasinghe were the established writers.
Yes.
And
no,
then,
I took a long time to be established.
so by the 80s you were well established.
I was an outsider, you know.
Well, by the 80s you were pretty well known, and I really appreciated the fact that, you know, when I started the New Lankan Review,
Yes.
I could count on you. But then, I think when I thought, look, I shouldn't be doing this by myself, and we started New English Writers Cooperative, you were fantastic. I mean, you not only were on the founder editorial board, but when I left the British Council, you ran it practically single-handed.
I did.
And I think you kept it going. Fantastic.
Yeah, for 20 years.
How did you relate to both the old established writers and the new ones? And what are the differences between, let's say, the pioneering days when you started writing, when English writing was not very much accepted,
Yes.
and the 90s, by which time it was really quite acceptable to write in English?
There was a person called Stuart Weaver. Do you remember him? He came from
never knew him, but I'd heard of him.
Yes, he came from the British Council, and he wrote an idiotic sort of article in the paper about elephants and I don't know what. So I responded to that, and I told him that he shouldn't write about things he doesn't know about. And then he invited me to his, and I think Punya Kanti was there. There were 2 or 3 people, and this girl who became a Buddhist nun.
Suvimali.
Yes, Suvimali was there. Nobody had ever recognized Suvimali. Suvimali was a superb writer, and she wrote about Sri Lanka the way I wanted to learn about Sri Lanka. So that was a starting point. But then when you set up the English Writers Cooperative with Maureen, Maureen Senavaratne, I found that a wonderful opportunity. But it's now declining because people are changing. The objective of this English Writers Cooperative was to allow local writers all over the island to have a source, a place to publish. And now that has changed. Now the people who are members like to publish themselves. I shouldn't say this, but it is so. And I find that very sad, because now I have done a review of that in my, I don't know whether you've ever seen that 6th yearly in 2000. I wrote on the previous period, and how many writers. We had over 260 people, and of those, I don't know how many people have written books. Because they all send me copies and poetry and what have you. There's been a tremendous, because they had a chance. And our criterion was excellence, nothing else. It didn't matter who we were.
We had a good, tough editorial board policy.
Sorry?
We had a very good editorial board policy.
Yes, and also we didn't allow politics, nor religion. But now anything goes, and I don't approve of that at all. And also we had a rule that only people who had published could be actually members of the English Writers Cooperative, because we wanted to raise the standard. But I don't know, I resigned. I resigned because I couldn't go along with that. I think just in time.
Your poetry has a wonderful range.
Yes.
But one thing that's particularly struck me is how you, along with 1 or 2 other writers, are perhaps the best exponent of the very difficult and bloody times through which we lived. You know, poems like Landscapes. And I was wondering what relationship you see between, you know, the horrors you experienced as a Jew in Nazi Germany, and then what happened in Sri Lanka in 1971, and then again in the 80s. And you've captured it really extraordinarily movingly. Do you feel there's a connection there as well?
Absolutely, because, you know, my experience in Germany, people don't realize, unless you have lived through that horrible period, the fear, the constant fear, the fear of being your neighbors, of your, you had no chance. Now as children we couldn't do this, that and the other. But it is a fear that has really accompanied me all my life. When I came here, and during the bad periods we had, I got each of the children a little suitcase. And they said, you pack your toothbrush and some pants and this and that and the other, just in case we have a problem, because it was so close. You know, around here we had problems and what have you. And even today, there's hardly a day when I don't compare my life to that of my parents. It's there. You can't, and you know, that's why I am so pessimistic. I know you are the advisor to the president on reconciliation.
No one takes my advice.
No, never mind. You are the advisor to the president. But, you know, when these things happen, which are so vital and so final, is there a possibility? Now, I went back to Germany, and the first time I landed, after 44 years, they put me aside, not because I was a Jew or because I was an extreme or whatever, but because I worked for Amnesty International. They wanted to know whether I was a spy or whether I was going to be a problem in Germany. They released me after some time. But, you know, it is an experience that doesn't go away. And I wonder whether a real reconciliation, if one shouldn't find something which is more like an equilibrium. But reconciliation, I think, is not quite the right word. Because I have never ceased. I mean, I have friends who are German, but you never forget. And you look at a person and you think, what were they doing at that time?
I think I can see that. I think there is a distinction, though, between not forgetting, and I think some of your poems emphasize that.
Yeah.
It is evil to forget.
You know, I made a film in Germany. Did you know that?
Yes, you
With
mentioned it.
Michael Lenz. Yes, and he did some research before that. We did a Gallup poll. And he sort of asked the local population in my hometown, and they said, what happened to all the Jews who used to live? We had a population of about 4,000 Jews in our synagogue. And they said they didn't know. And then he asked another lot and said, what happened to all the Jews who used to live in this town? And then they said, well, somehow they were taken away. And then he asked another lot, and they laughed. And they said they went up in smoke.
I think I would agree with what you said about the need to remember, and it's horrifying when people don't. But I also think you can move towards both forgiveness and understanding. That doesn't mean excusing. And I think that's what we need to in Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. I think that is absolutely true. The only thing is that we are moving on. We are all, I mean, the people who have been involved in all these problems are getting older. Now, I must be one of not so many survivors who are left alive to tell the story as it really was. Because now you find the second generation taking over, and it's no longer, they haven't got that kind of, that feeling that Germany induced in people. It's only, not only me. Recently there's been a book written, In the Garden of Beasts. Have you heard about it?
No.
It's a Tiergarten in Berlin.
Right, yes.
And it is about that period. And an American ambassador is assigned to Berlin, and then he encounters this situation. You know, what happens is that when we are gone, we means the generation who experience all this, it'll be all history. And history is, of course, always deceptive and biased.
I have to say one thing that I find, I know that having worked for Amnesty, you agree with me, is that perhaps one of the most upsetting factors is how in Israel, in Israel, there's total forgetfulness of what it was to be a victim.
Exactly.
And I think the way that sometimes they use the victimization, which must never be forgotten of the Jews in Germany, has transformed into a different form of victimization. Right. And that is also what we saw in Sri Lanka with the LTT.
Yeah,
and that's horrifying.
But in Sri Lanka, people have a very happy sort of temperament on the whole, apart from the bad temper and the moments of violence and what have you. And I find that here, I don't know how it is in India or in other Asian countries, I've lived mainly here, there is a fantastic ability to forget.
Right.
I mean, and I think forgetting is not a good thing. And I think children must be taught history, and especially German children. Now in Germany, in one school they said, no, we don't teach about the Holocaust because it's not good for children. I mean, a ludicrous statement considering what the Germans did to the children, you know?
No, I think it is important to remember.
I
But I
think
think you also need to remember in a holistic way. And I feel sometimes the Israeli governments don't do that. You know, they remember selectively.
Yeah, right.
And
but governments also, they don't really all know the historical knowledge. I mean, not every MP or every is educated to the extent that you are, that you know what is what. So you have to take into account that some of these people haven't got a clue.
True.
And you know, these people who advocate Hitler and who still promote, you still have this neo-Nazi movement going on and gaining power sometimes. I was very glad to find that Mrs. What is her name in Germany?
Angela Merkel,
huh?
the Chancellor.
Angela, yeah. I have a great admiration for her. She's a great woman. I really like her. East Germany. And
She's from East
tough
Germany,
East
I think
Germany.
that probably helps you to remember better.
Yes, and very solid basic education and hard working and a lot of common sense and very understanding and very simple. We should have a few more like that. Now that's another thing.
Politicians in Sri Lanka would help.
What?
We don't have enough women
That
politicians.
is what
in
I
Sri
was
Lanka.
just going to say. We have, but we don't have a chance, do we?
I think there are problems. Can I move on
Yeah,
this
sure.
to a really an aspect of this, which is something that perhaps we need to emphasize more? Your lyrical and love poetry is also fantastic, and
It's
it
what?
also fantastic, and it expresses also in a very restrained way a strong sexuality. Now, Ateria to me is one of the most beautiful but most powerful poems.
Which one is that?
Ateria.
You like that
I
one?
love that very much, and that those last few lines.
Yeah, the trees and the garden.
Yeah.
In fact, you know, there was an article in the paper here.
Yes, and I saw your answer,
But they
saying the
didn't put
lovely
the
smell
letter.
is Ateria.
Yeah, but I wrote a letter to the editor, and I said that we have this in the garden, and these are the legends about the tree. And Mr. Navaratna, wasn't it? Mr. Navaratna is welcome to come and take some clippings, because you mustn't buy them.
Yeah.
They must be gifted or they come on their own. But he hadn't published the letter. I was very upset about that.
No, the letter was published.
I didn't see
I saw
that.
it, yes.
Ah,
But of course what was missing in that is those last three lines, which are so sensuous. And like Andrew Marvell, the words of Asclepiades, that we should all be dead. Because no, also what we should stress is how you moved from Germany to England and then became a distinguished poet in English. And writing in your second language.
yeah, now that is
Yes.
another big problem. Because German, I refused to speak German.
Right.
Why should I speak the language of the murderers of my parents? But then, when I went to Germany, I had a friendship. A person who was actually, what shall I say, a doctor of literature, who was very upset that my education in German, he had read my English poetry and they published it. And then he showed me some of the German poetry. And I must say, I was quite overwhelmed by some of the poets, the older poets, even the younger poets. There are some very good poets. And I have translated, there's some lovely poems.
No, your translation of Rilke.
Pardon?
Your translations of Rilke
Yes.
are really good. I published some of them many years ago in the New
I
London
like
Review.
Rilke. He's very, yeah, there's a lovely one about Orpheus.
Yes.
That one I really like. That's a lovely poem. I used that at the German Culture Institute. Of course, the German Culture Institute, finally we cooperated quite a lot, and I had a lovely relationship. Did you ever write the poem about Anna Blume?
Yes.
Yes, that one. You know, that was at the 2000, what you call that? There was this exhibition in Hanover, and it was worldwide, the competition.
Right. That
They
was,
invited me, but I didn't go because they wanted me to stay with the German family. I
and
said,
you didn't
no,
want to
thank
do
you.
that.
No way.
Again, one of this. One thing is to go back to the title again of one of your books. You know, with words we write our lives.
Yes.
And I think you've had this long experience, Germany, then coming here, your work on the old sites in Sri Lanka, Dambulla, Polonnaruwa, and then of course the years of conflict. And then all through this strain of family, of love. I think it's a fantastic
You
sort
know,
of range of
this sort of
subjects.
this family thing was very, very important.
Yeah.
You know the story of the sari that fell down when I had to pay my respects to the Vice Chancellor?
No, I didn't know that.
And that is now my husband worked with Sir Nicholas Articular.
Yeah.
And after I came, about a week, my husband was with him. And after about a week of coming here, my husband said that the boss wants to see you.
Yeah.
So then I said, okay. So my husband, being totally airy-fairy, said, you have to wear a sari. So I said, okay. So then somebody produced, then they asked me what color. I said black, I love black. 23 or 24,
Right.
and lovely morning, sun shining. I appear in full black, blouse and sari, and I didn't know how to drape it. So the only people who could help me were Kushi and Aki,
The two stepdaughters.
two stepdaughters. One was 9 or 8, the other was 12 or 13. They also didn't know very much. So anyhow, we did the best we could, and then I marched off with my husband to see Sir Nicholas. And then halfway through the proceedings, I felt that something wasn't right. And I found that the whole thing had absolutely... I comforted Manya with it the other day when she was here.
The sari collapsed.
Sorry, correct.
But
So
since
then Sir Nicholas's wife took me, Lady Articular, took me into a room and she said, now let me teach you how to wear sari. But Sir Nicholas took me into another room and he gave me a good grilling. And he told me that there was a synagogue here in Colombo. And that the origins of synagogue were during the war when Montgomery was the, the overall,
Right, yes.
what you call it?
Mountbatten.
Mountbatten, I'm sorry. Mountbatten was the overall. That the soldiers from the Middle East and whatever would come here for their rest.
Yeah.
And this was the place where the Jewish soldiers from all over were coming. So I looked for the place, I found it. It was an ordinary house, but it had a mezuzah. A mezuzah is a small thing that you stick onto the door with the Jewish prayer inside.
Yeah.
And that was still there. But now it's been pulled down and it's no longer there.
Well, since your sari slipped many years ago, you haven't put a foot wrong. So thank you very much indeed.
Okay, well, it's very nice of you to
today
say
and
so.
for having been with us for 60 years.
Yes. Well, I have been very happy here, and I have expressed my happiness and my gratitude in as many ways as I can. But I'm not an uncritical, what should I say, viewer from the outside, but it's useful to have somebody who's both inside and outside. Okay?
It does help. Thank you.